Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Hugh Simpson-Wells, founder of Oxford Computer Group. Today, we're going to be talking about testing identity management implementations using Software IDM's test panel. My little joke is that this is the fifth in a four-part series of webinars on the Identity Panel Suite. I'll direct you to the other four shortly. So we're thinking about identity and access management implementations systems. I'm not very concerned about what's in this box, what the technology is. It could be Microsoft Identity Manager, it could be Saviynt, SailPoint, it could be HyperSync Panel. It could be a combination of things actually. But in all cases, I'm thinking in terms of sources of authority. So systems which provide authoritative data on objects and attributes that we can consume. We then have various processes which eventually produce output that can be used by target systems. Any of these systems can be on premises or in the cloud. And the processes will be fundamentally, the biggest one we think about probably is synchronization of objects and their attributes. We might be managing passwords, supporting single sign-on. There may be workflows that we need to run. We might be interested in checking the health of various systems. We're going to want to be able to send notifications to people, to produce reports based on that data, and so on. And we're going to want to give people access for different reasons. There'll be an operating interface for configuration, monitoring, troubleshooting. Perhaps we want to give users access to the identity data in the form of white pages or requests for permissions, that sort of thing. Or maybe we want to manage permissions. So we've got interesting roles and group memberships that we want to control in interesting ways, or perhaps attest, certify or recertify what permissions people are supposed to have. So this is what I'm thinking, this is my generic system that I'm thinking about, but we need to sort of just narrow it down a little bit for the purposes of discussion, which we'll do in a moment. But first of all, why test? Well, hopefully the answer to this is obvious. We absolutely need to be verifying that a system does what it's supposed to do, perhaps more so for an identity and management system than for almost any system because of all the systems that it touches. We need to know it's fit for purpose, that meets the business requirements. I imagine that somewhere we've got a list of business requirements and we can look at those and design a series of tests which are going to allow us to verify this. But not only do we want to check that it does the positive things that it's supposed to do, we need to ensure it responds well to erroneous conditions. We need to be able to throw duplicate values, missing values, poorly formed values at it and see that it responds in a good way to all of them, or even missing systems or half-finished processes and so on. So there'll be negative testing we want to do as well. And if we don't do this proper formal testing, we are running all sorts of risks. Security risks, first of all. We can run into privacy issues by giving people the wrong access to data. We can lose data. We can expose ourselves to fraud. There may be compliance and legal frameworks that we must abide by, so we want to ensure that we're conforming to those. If we don't take this kind of due care to properly test systems, we'll run into reputational damage. And there are all manner of costs that we'll run risk of as well. Costs of backtracking because we released a system that wasn't ready to be released. We released a system with bugs that then had to be pulled back, redeveloped and pushed out again. The costs of fixing damage that we might have done, and so on. Okay, Identity Panel Suite, these are the 5 applications in the suite. And I mentioned that there were 4 existing webinars. We've already recorded webinars on Identity Panel, HyperSync Panel, Service Panel, and Access Panel. Now we're going to deal with Test Panel. But just make the note that Test Panel depends, like all of these do, on Identity Panel. So when we come to demo, we'll be seeing Identity Panel as well as Test Panel. Okay, as I suggested I would, I've reduced the complexity of our diagram so that we've got simply sources of authority, target systems, and something going on in the middle. Again, as yet, I'm not interested in the technology that's in the middle there. And I wanted to pull out some nomenclature. We're going to need to set up tests. So every time we want to do a test, we've got to put our source of authority into the right state to start that test. We need to be able to effectively write into those systems. The feature that does that in Test Panel is a fixture. Now, straight away, you might say, well, wait a minute, can you write into an HR system? Well, in production, probably not. But most of the testing that we ever do is going to be in a test environment, an environment that is made to look as much as possible like the real environment and act as much as possible like the real environment, so that when we do roll out into production, we're confident that the system is going to work with minimal fixing. And I think we could say that in a test environment, it's likely that we could write into our HR system. If we can't, there are tricks we can use, but I'm not going to go into them here. Then we, having set up, we exercise the test. That boils down to allowing identity and access management processes to take place within the system. So in other words, synchronization happens, or whatever else has to happen in there. And then we verify. I do tend to mix up between the words verify and validate. Apologies for that in advance. But we verify. We verify that a user account got created. We verify that attributes have the right values. And what we use for that, the feature in Test Panel, is an assertion. So we have the number of fixtures to set up, and then we verify by having assertions. We assert that there is a user account in Entra ID. We assert that the attribute for user account control is whatever it should be. And then we need to be able to tear that down and start again. So set up, exercise, verify, tear down. For tear down, we use fixtures, because in Test Panel, any time that we're changing a system, we're going to use a fixture, whether that's adding a row into a SQL database, or whether it's removing it again or removing an account. You may be familiar with a different set of terminology: arrange, act, assert. And if you want the fourth one, it would be annihilate, and they correspond to set up, exercise, verify, tear down. Now, if we set up, exercise, and verify, that's a test case. And actually, tear down is another test case, and we will look at some of these shortly. Okay, I'm now going to bring it down to the actual demo that I can show you. And for this, I've got simply one source of authority, which I hope is representative, and I have 3 target systems. What I'm using in the middle as my identity and access management technology shouldn't be surprising. It's HyperSync Panel, because that's part of the suite that I'm playing with. But I'm also using Microsoft Entra Cloud Sync. So there are 2 synchronization processes going on that are both effectively being tested. And we're synchronizing attributes, and we're provisioning and deprovisioning objects. I've said that Identity Panel is a core requirement. It will be providing the UI, it will be providing the connectivity, it will be providing a reporting engine, workflows, and much, much more. So let's now think of some tests that we might do. Let's imagine that we've got 4 business requirements that we've identified and 4 tests, 1 test for each of them. Now, this may not be entirely realistic, because in a real case, we might have a business requirement with lots of tests, but just for the purpose of demonstration, I want to keep this simple. So first of all, we might have a new user in HR. If we have a new user in HR, we want to see accounts being provisioned into these other systems. So that's our first business requirement, and we'll have a test to go with it. Our next one will be a department change. So we make a change to an attribute in HR. It happens to be department, so they're going to now get moved to a different department, and we're going to see those changes being propagated through to the other systems. Next, we might have a user that's put into an inactive state, disabled. It could be that they've been temporarily suspended. There could be all sorts of reasons for it. So we've marked them in the HR system, and we want to make sure that their account in AD is disabled, their account in Entra ID is disabled, and actually we'll remove their account entirely from ADLDS. So that's another business requirement and another test case. Our fourth and final test case for the purposes of demonstration is when somebody leaves. They don't actually get taken out of the HR system, they're just marked as though they were deleted, and that should result in them being completely taken out of these target systems. So there's 4 tests that we're going to try and demonstrate. Okay, let's now take a look at, first of all, at the on-premises end of this. The on-premises end, we've got an HR maintenance, an HR system. This is a little pretend one that we've created for our training. It's just an application that sits on a SQL database. And the principle's the same, just like an HR system. And if in this I were to add a new employee, which I don't need to do, but if I did, it would generate a new unique ID. I would fill in all the details and I'd have a new row in my SQL database. To go with Abigail Fletcher here, we've got a user account in ADLDS, and we've got a user account in Active Directory as well. So next thing we want is to look at the cloud end of things. And at the cloud end of things, I need to close that. At the cloud end of things, let's look in the Microsoft Entra Admin Center, and let's see that Abigail Fletcher is here too. So this is all quite real, and you'll see that she is on-premise synchronized. That's telling us that Cloud Sync has done its job and synchronized her at least. Now let's look at the product that we've come to see. And we're really looking at Identity Panel here because test case lives within it. As we said, it's a core requirement. And you'll see that we've got a tool here for running tests. So I've got 2 test suites actually. I've got one that's for cleaning up, which I'm not interested now in just now. So that's the teardown part of it. But here are the 4 tests that I've mentioned sitting inside this suite. And I'm going to set it going so that you can see that something's actually happening. What's happening now is it's gradually running through all the steps it needs to do to run this. And I'll explain more about that a little bit later. We'll just leave it processing away. Down the bottom here, I've got a history chart which is showing recent activity of testing. Anything that you see that's purple is a fixture that worked okay. Anything that's green is an assertion that went okay. Anything that's red is an assertion that failed, and anything that's orange is a fixture that failed. And what you'll see is that for a while I had a problem with assertions not working, but eventually over time I ended up with more and more things working and fewer things not working. Exactly what you would expect if you were trying to iron out some bugs in the system and you're just testing and testing and testing and testing. I've done this test 30, 40, maybe 100 times over this period, and you'll get the idea that to have done that manually would not have been funny. I've been able to, once I set it up, repeatedly run the test, find out what's wrong, fix the bug, test again. Okay, while all of that's going on, let's take a look at some other presentations of data. So here we have a report, and this report, and I'll just run it again from scratch so that you can kind of see what's going on. So I've got various reports available to me in the system. This one is called test case results summary, and I can choose any period of time over which I'd like to see it. I'm going to say the last few days. I'll include tomorrow just to make sure that I've completely covered today, and then I can say go ahead and build that. Now I can modify this report, modify the format, change the which data is included, what dates are covered, and so on. But this becomes a standard piece of evidence that we can present to anybody. I'll just increase the number of items on a page so that as we scroll down you can see some more interesting stuff. So we've got stuff that failed. I think I need to just resort that to do that again. We've got some stuff lower down which has failed, I imagine. I've had lots of success recently. There's one that failed, and you'll be able to see what it was that failed. It'll tell you that in this case, validate user and AD didn't work for whatever reason. Here's another one which it was AD account disabled that failed in that case. Importantly, I can download that in a number of different formats, Excel, HTML, delimited, and so on. And even more importantly, I can have that automatically emailed to a team of people or to individuals, perhaps different formats for different individuals on a daily basis or an hourly basis or a weekly basis, whatever you're looking for. So we're all looking at the same data, and we've all got evidence of what was tested and when, what went wrong, and whether it got fixed. Okay, so there's some reporting capability. Back to our dashboard where we might see, well, actually, it's already finished. So we'll come and have a look. We'll have a look at the output of that in a moment. But I want to just show you what this looks like when we configure it. So I've got two test suites. One was the cleanup one, which is not very interesting. The other is the set of 4 JML tests. If I look at this first one, which is the new user one, create a user, I have a fixture to create a user, and I have the assertions that I want, that they were created in these different systems. And in between, something has to happen. This is the exercise part of it. Now, if this were MIM, I would want a PowerShell step which goes out and says, MIM, do your stuff. Or I'd want something that kicked OKTA off. Or I'd want to simply wait for process to happen. But one way or another, I need something to happen in there. In this case, because I'm using HyperSync Panel, all I need to do is run my own internal schedule of synchronization here. And in fact, that's lots of steps. It has to scan systems, synchronize, and scan them again. If you're familiar with MIM, you'll get the idea of import, synchronization, and export. So I've got all sorts of things going on in there. And if I were to look at any of the others, I'd see something similar. So a fixture to disable a user, do the schedule, and then assert that the right things happened. Those suites are making use of these reusable modules, if you like, these fixtures. So if I look at a fixture, create a user in HR, fundamentally what I'm doing is I'm writing values into columns in a row in a SQL table. But because I want to reuse some of these values, I need to parameterize them. I don't simply want to write the name of the person, perhaps. I want to have a parameter that I can reuse. It's called a memo. I've defined them down here, and with lack of imagination that I have, I'm creating somebody called James Kirk. So I can change these parameters easily enough. I could change them in an automated way if I wanted to generate lots and lots of these. So I'm creating somebody called James Kirk, and I'm also using another capability within Identity Panel and HyperSync Panel, which is to generate a unique ID. So that will generate a unique ID, which I don't know at this stage, but that's another parameter that I can reuse. And that means that when I come to perhaps disable a user, I identify which one by using the parameter that I've defined, the memo that I defined. And when I come to my assertions, here are all the, if you like, the modular assertions that I can use. If I want to validate the user in AD, then first of all, I want to find the user, find if they're there using the parameter that I just discussed. And then I want to check perhaps a bunch of attributes to see that they're in good shape, either that they are the exact thing that I parameterized, in other words, that's the value, or that they're the right shape. What I mean by the right shape is that for some account to be unique, if I keep generating people called James Kirk, they've got to be called James Kirk 1, James Kirk 2, and so on. HyperSync Panel takes care of that. The Identity and Access Management System is taking care of the uniqueness. I just need to use a regex here to make sure that it at least begins with the correct given name and surname. So that will work for James Kirk 27 or whatever I've got to. Similarly with the user principal name, that it starts with the given name and surname and ends with the thing that I know it should be, which is at IDP 31 lab and so on. So these standardized fixtures and assertions that I've created put into suites which can then be used. So going back to our dashboard, as I say, this is completed. So to take a look at what happened, I go to history. Now, generally speaking, if I just turn that off and just refresh history, generally speaking, this is a history of all the steps of everything that's going on Identity Panel. But I'm only interested in test cases. And so these are the 4 test cases, these last 4 that I'm interested in. And you'll see lots of happy green ticks. So our new user one went through all of these steps and 1 successful fixture and 3 successful assertions. All of these steps in between are the steps that are needed to make HyperSync Panel work. As I say, there could be just a single PowerShell step in there or something else. So, and by the way, most of the time it took to do it is that process, and that'll usually be the case. The actual creation, the actual fixture and the assertions, they happen very quickly. And if I wanted to home in a little bit further, I could take a look at this validation and I would see that, yes, it's true that the value is IT. Yes, it's true that the James Kirk 7 met our regex requirement. Yes, it's true, well, and so on, you get the idea. If I were interested in examining a problem, I might look at this and say, there was clearly something going on here. Let's have a look what went wrong there. I can click that. And another beautiful thing about this product is the interactivity between the different things, the way things typically turn into hyperlinks. And these are the 3 cases that are referred to in that point on the graph. And if I look at one of them, maybe this one, I can see that there was a failed assertion here. It failed to validate the user in AD. If I look at this, we'll see that it kind of looks all right, except when we get to given name, and it turns out there wasn't a given name to match up, and so it produced a false at that point. And well, evidently, I would then have to ask myself, well, why didn't the IAM system deliver a given name? As it turned out, it was something I introduced deliberately, but it doesn't matter. I'd have to go and I'd find out that I'd misspelt the name or not put the rule in or whatever it was. So hopefully you get an idea here about the idea that we can configure tests here, we can run the test, but we can also see the analysis and we can make that analysis available in various forms to whoever needs it. So now I'll just go back to my PowerPoint, and I'd like to just run through the key points that I think we've been looking at. I don't think we're going to have an argument that any system should be properly tested before initial rollout and after modifications, and perhaps because identity and access management systems have become increasingly complex and are relied upon by many other systems, it's become more important than ever to do this properly. Test Panel then does automated testing. Suites of tests can be repeatedly run with ease once they've been set up. And that applies to smoke tests. So that is the quick check when you've just rolled something out to check that it basically works. End of day tests, perhaps a series of tests that you run at the end of each day to make sure that you didn't introduce errors as you extended and developed the system. And then maybe much later on in the life of an implementation, regression tests. We need to roll out changes, perhaps new attributes to be synchronized or new objects to be provisioned into different systems. And our regression tests will check that we didn't break anything else as we did it. And of course, we'll gradually develop those tests as necessary. Test Panel then provides a single interface for testing, configuration, operation, and reporting. So we've got the visibility, and we can drill down into the details of records as needed and make that available in whichever forms appropriate for the different personnel involved. It can rapidly and effectively detect issues, and we've got the tools we need to drill down, find what it is and fix it, and hopefully improve the quality of what we deliver to user acceptance or into a live system or whatever. We can reduce the risks involved, risks that I discussed, such as wrongful access, and help you to conform with whatever quality or regulatory standards you might have signed up to or be obliged to meet. You can perhaps reduce the time spent doing user acceptance testing because you're delivering a more tested system to start with, and maybe as a result reduce implementation costs overall. Finally, the sooner you implement Test Panel, the sooner you're going to reap the benefits. The early effort in configuring it will be paid back handsomely over the lifetime of the implementation. I feel confident. You know, us engineers and developers, we tend to be very optimistic about our work. We often favor art over science, but really what we should be doing is welcoming any system which provides effective checks and balances and does bring science to it and provides visibility to the entire team. And on a personal note, I would say that in 2 days of identity and access management implementations, notably with nearly always with Microsoft Identity Manager, this is the only credible generic testing system of its type that I've seen, and I actually believe it could and should become the industry standard. But that's just me. Okay, any further questions you've got, email me. We'll be sending you a link to a recording, which you should certainly forward to your colleagues if they're interested. Email me if you'd like a discussion about your particular needs or a personalized demonstration. We won't be doing Q&A here because we would rather come back with specific answers to your specific needs. And I'm very happy to do as many personalized demonstrations as are needed. Do see recordings of the previous webinars at our website, but we'll send you the links to those as well. And more webinars to come in the future, I hope. Thank you very much for listening, and see you next time.